Hello, welcome back to my studio. Today we are doing a demo of this painting. This was so fun. This is one of my family members and just like the sweetest, cutest face ever. And in this demo, I'm going to not only walk through the steps, some of the things I talk about early on is why do I start with a green underpainting, some things that unfold, but a lot of this demo basically existed in this space where the painting was more or less resolved, but something was off about the face. Proportions were slightly off. And one thing about painting portraiture is as humans, we're really keyed into observing faces. And when something is even like a millimeter off, we're really attuned to seeing that. And we don't always know what's off. We know something's off. And as a portrait artist, I have found myself in this sort of uncanny valley, so to speak, or this place when it's almost lifelike, but not quite. And basically, these are my best tips and lessons and techniques and tools that I use whenever a portrait ends up there. You know, full disclosure, I didn't start painting portraits. I started with landscapes and still lifes. And slowly, I've worked my way into portraiture in the last couple of years. So while I have a lot of painting skill and, techniques under my belt, learning what to do when a face was almost there but not quite there was a new skill that I sort of have learned and fleshed out. So all that to say, I have a lot of tips, and there is certainly things that you can proactively do other than just stare at it and hope the answer comes to you, although maybe that works sometimes. So you can proactively sort of figure out what's happening with a painting and resolve the face and get that likeness that you're going for. If that sounds interesting to you and you want to see this beautiful little painting come together, definitely watch the video. Thanks for being here and enjoy the demo. So I went ahead and started on green. Sometimes I get asked why I choose the underpainting or the color I choose to sort of ground my painting with. And the short answer is there's not a ton of rhyme or reason. It is a very long-standing tradition within painting that you tone your white surface. Typically, gesso is white, and white is hard to work with because it is the lightest color on the value scale. And, there are some paintings where I won't use white at all. So it would be very distracting, would read like a really shiny highlight if white was in there. So, in college we toned with gray. I also see painters tone with various shades of brown. I choose lime green because I really like the color, and that's kind of the end of it. I went ahead and did my job with a dark grayish brown, I believe. And, a lot of the way I draw is sort of just checking perimeters. I'm really not focused on features in the early part of the painting. As I'm not trying to get the eyelashes on or the eyes perfect. I'm really just trying to find placement and color. I always think the beginning of my paintings are kind of a mad dash to get everything covered. It's not to say that I'm not being careful, that I'm not doing something, I don't want to get it totally wrong and have to dig myself out of a hole. But I will say years of painting has, especially in the early stages of the painting, the first half even, I'm not so worried about getting things too wrong. I really like the 75% rule, where I'm just trying to make things like 75% right. The enemy of good is often perfect. And I find that that's absolutely true as far as paintings. And so just getting it generally right is good. Even if I did manage to do a drawing, the initial drawing, and it was perfectly accurate, let's say I used a projector or a grid system, I would still block in the color of the skin and the eyes and the shadow and the hair and probably cover up most of that drawing. So I find that being able to sort of change and shift and move as you go, and I do this with acrylic and oil paintings, is actually the most helpful thing to have. And I also find that paintings, even if they kind of veer off the path, as this one does, as you'll see in a little bit, and kind of goes wrong, even if that happens, I find that it looks better than just like going in and sort of coloring it in. Like, I like the way a painting looks when it's been kind of lived in or, labored over a little bit. I mean, maybe that's just with my paintings, but sometimes it creates a very effortless, light sort of effect. And sometimes you get it wrong, like this painting where I just couldn't seem to get the proportions lined up. And, I have to sort of go back and forth and really try to hone those features. Which kind of brings me to the point of the video, which is like what happens when a face does kind of go off the rails. And I want to start by talking about the importance of placement and values in the planes of the face versus painting features. It is a common mistake that I too can fall into from time to time, as shown by this painting, where we get really caught up in making sure the features look right, making sure the eyes look like, the reference photo's eyes or the nose or the lips. And what can end up happening is you are so keyed into what the features look like that you have gotten the placement on the face slightly off. So the thing that's more important is the spacing. So how far the eyes are from each other, from the hairline, from the ears, from the nose, from the mouth. Having facial proportions kind of under your belt and memorized is really helpful. It's not to say that everyone's face follows the same facial proportions, but I find that it's kind of a guidepost that keeps you from going too far off in the beginning. And it's also knowing that when someone's facial proportions deviate from that standard, even if it is just slightly, and I will say most of the time, even with really like faces that have like a lot of character, it is a very slight change. Even in that case, just the slight changes from that standard face grid gives us our character and our likeness and makes someone look uniquely like them. Today's video is sponsored by Sari.studio, aka my website, which will be linked below. Everyone who has ever bought a sticker, a t-shirt, a print, certainly an original, you are a valuable part of my online art community, and you have made this channel possible. I'm putting a lot of love into the channel this year, and the funding for that has come from y'all's orders over the years. So if you want to shop, support the channel, support what I'm doing, make sure you give my website a look. And so what I'm noticing, I believe at this point, is that something's off with the nose. And what it ended up being was the spacing. The nose I actually had right. The lips were relatively right, but where the corner of the lip lined up with underneath the eye, where the ends of the nostrils lined up, was ever so slightly off. And so what are some of the ways you can check this? Well, the first thing I think that's really helpful is having a mirror on hand. Being able to look at your painting in reverse can be really helpful. Usually what I like to use the mirrors for is when I can't tell what's wrong with my painting, but something is wrong, especially with faces, I will look at it in a mirror. And I would say more times than not, my error becomes all of a sudden apparent. I'm wrestling with a face and I think there's something wrong with the eyes. And then I notice when I look in the mirror that, the chin's weird. And yeah, it can make the eyes look strange. Like you wouldn't think, but our face is very, our features they all make sense in relationship to each other. And so I've had situations like that happen. Another thing that you can do is you can use a grid tool and really line up where the features are falling, aka like is the edge of the right eye line up with the edge of the mouth, things like that. And it can be a little hard when the face isn't like straight on or straight profile or straight 3/4. This is, she's looking slightly off of straight on. And so the facial features are going to vary a little bit, but you're just checking them within the context of the painting. And, I find that can be a really helpful tool. The other thing you can do, and what I will do if things get really tough, if taking a break, coming back at it with fresh eyes doesn't help, is I will use an app like Snapseed, or I believe there's another app. I'll try to link it that's just for this. But you want to use any app that has the overlay feature. And what I'll do is I'll take a picture of the painting I'm working on, and then I'll overlay my reference photo just to see where I'm off. I will kind of look at it. It'll help me. It does kind of the same thing as the mirror. And you can lower the opacity and sort of play around with that. And that's what really helped me with this. A lot of what was happening is the mouth was slightly off and the bottom of the left eye wasn't low enough. I was sort of treating it proportionally like it was a straight on. And when a face is straight on, the bottom of both of the eyes is going to be even. But because her head was slightly turned, the eye closer to me was actually a bit lower to sort of compensate for that tilt. And it wasn't until I made this observation that I was able to go back in and redraw a little bit of the face structure and get it to be more accurate. And this was one of those things where I thought I sort of finished the painting and I sent it to my sister when it was, a little before where I'm at right now. And she was very sweet. She kind of insinuated that something may be slightly off. Very kind. And I knew it. I knew I wasn't done, to be honest with you. So I went the next morning and I tinkered around with that Snapseed overlay, and between that and fresh eyes, all of a sudden things that were kind of evading me were very clear. The bangs needed to be slightly lowered, the eyebrow on the right side needed to be modified a little bit, and of course the eye needed to be lower as her face was turned away. And it was only after I sort of was able to see those that everything fell into place. And truthfully, they were pretty minor adjustments. I would say less than maybe 10%, maybe even as little as 5% of the actual composition was truly changed. But because I was able to slightly modify those features, it made a huge difference. Which brings me to the difficulty of painting portraits. I mentioned this, but our eyes are so keyed in to picking up on the differences in a face. What I mean by that is, like, most of us more or less have the same features as every other human on the planet, barring some more extreme facial differences. And yet everyone looks so unique. There are even identical twins can look somewhat dissimilar from each other, ever so slightly. And we're attuned to those slight differences. It's crazy that, when you're around a pair of identical twins for long enough, you can easily tell the difference between them. And it's just that ability to pick up on the most tiny little details that we have as humans, as we've evolved to pay attention to, that helps us do that. But that superpower of being able to read tiny little differences in the face, whether it's emotions or being able to tell one person from another, that also makes portraits hard, because when something's slightly off, it feels very off. Where if you're painting a picture of a fruit bowl and all your grapes are slightly off, probably no one would notice unless those grapes are like defying the laws of gravity. But whenever you're doing a face and something is slightly off, even if it's just a millimeter of the eyebrow, it looks off, and it can really mess with your likeness, which is the ability for something to look like the person. All this to say, don't beat yourself up if you're working on a portrait and it's just not gelling. It is a skill, but give yourself patience and use the mirror, use the gridding and the ability to check one feature from another. Really focus on the distance between features as opposed to actually painting those features themselves. And then finally, use the app. That's a great tool. I use it as kind of a last resort because I want to develop the ability to check myself. But, you don't publish a painting and say, hey, I used, an app or a grid or a projector on your painting. If it helps, it helps. And, that's what I have done. And I think it can be a very helpful thing to have in there. Don't be afraid to use whatever helps you out. Thank you so much for watching this video. Hopefully you enjoyed watching this painting come together. I know I certainly enjoyed creating it and sharing those tips with you guys. Those are things that I wish I would have known when I first started doing portraits. There's advice that I got from my painting professor, which is if you can paint one thing, you can paint anything. And while I do believe in that, generally speaking, I know that the more familiar you get with the subject, the more you learn little tips and tricks that sort of pertain to that subject. So hopefully you got some of those and you feel more confident in your own painting skills. If you enjoyed this video, this demo, and you want to see more demos and tutorials and other educational art videos from me, make sure you hit the bell to get notifications, as well as subscribe. Of course, I hope you're subscribed. And stay tuned for future videos. Feel free to leave any comments if you have them below or suggestions for future videos. All in all, thank you for being here and happy creating. I think that